Hello everyone, my name is Sean Young, and for all those concerned, I am part of the Social Science Department, Ethnics 014, under Dr. John P. Harris. Today I will be presenting Asian Americans in the U.S. workforce. So before we start, I'd like to go through a brief timeline of Asian American history in the United States of America, particularly around their place in the workforce. So we have here some basic plot points starting in 1850 with the first major Asian American immigration to the United States. This was mostly centered around the gold rush of the 1850s, but this soon came to include the Transcontinental Railroad, which saw very many Asian American workers. Of course, right there in particular would be 1865 when the actual Transcontinental Rail started undergoing construction. And one of the people that spearheaded this effort was a man by the name of Crocker, and he employed very many Asian American immigrants for construction, and as such, the Asian Americans who were facing very many racial stereotypes were known as Crocker's pets. 1868, the Burlingame Treaty was put in place to provide safety provisions for Asians living in the Americas. And in 1890, Jacob Riis published How the Other Side Lives, a book which is heavily involved in the propagandization of Asian American perception in the United States of America. 1892. The Chinese Exclusion Act is extended under Gary's Law, and in 1965 we have the Immigration and Nationality Act, which undoes a large majority of the anti-Asian legislation present in America. And 1965 also happens to be the year that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was created, which is going to sound very familiar in a few seconds. So let's go a little bit into depth about the EEOC. The EEOC is a group that was established to deal with legal matters involving racial inequalities, and that's going to be very useful when we have to analyze the statistics of Asians in the workforce. So pulling up some basic statistics, in the fiscal year of 2014, Asians filed roughly 1,200 of 31,073 racial discrimination claims, which is roughly 3.9 to 4%. And Asians make up roughly 6.7% of the workforce population, according to the EEOC. Well, not the EEOC, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, my bad. Which is a roughly 0.3% discrepancy from the total U.S. population percentage. And of these, of the workforce population, Asians are typically majorly underrepresented in physical or lower skill labor professions, while they do see a major overrepresentation in skilled labor, particularly around technology and electronics. Okay, so here are some basic numbers from the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you can see properly, the Asians are the second column from the left. Unfortunately, my laser pointer doesn't seem to be working right now. That's a shame. But second column from the left, you can see that Asians are 6.7% of the workforce population in 2022. And in terms of agriculture, fishing, and hunting, they make a very low percentage of that workforce population, averaging roughly 1 to 2%, with a tendency towards the lower end of 1%. And in mining and quarry, they make up 3 to 5%, although this is very, very skewed because a lot of mineral extraction groups, they tend not to release their data for some reason, so unfortunately we're missing a large percentage of them. But if we were to extrapolate, we would probably see somewhere around 2 to 4% average for mineral extraction. So in terms of physical labor, Asians usually don't see as much work in these departments, while on the other hand, we can see this is for more, how to say, more skill-based labor, I would suppose. Implement manufacturing, machinery manufacturing, equipment manufacturing of all those sorts. If you look down around the middle, computers and electronic products manufacturing has Asians at roughly 22.6%, and under that, peripheral equipment manufacturing seeing almost 30% of Asians in their respective categories, which is a lot higher than we saw over in the more physical labor departments. So, based on this, we can assume pretty readily that Asians are are accepted far more into higher end professions than with low skill professions. So their constructed identity in America. The majority of the stereotypes assigned to Asians mostly come from actually historical stereotypes, which are majorly assisted by the book How the Other Side Lives by Reese, published in 1890. In this book, he describes them as cunning, ignorant, and indecent peoples. And he portrays the slum side of any Chinese communities that were formed during the first 40 years of their major arrivals. He would often over-portray smokers, gamblers, and prostitution in these communities, which heavily assisted in their portrayal in the modern standing. Why did I say that? That sounds wrong. But yeah, this is where a lot of the whole, where a lot of the vices portrayed in Asian stereotypes come from. And modern stereotypes include the model minority, high performance for minority group, which is high performance for minority group, the perpetual foreigner concept, which is the idea that no matter how long you or your family has been here, because you look different, you are not from here. And some media stereotypes include the effeminately nerdy or martial arts strong archetypes for Asian characters, and the extremely racist stereotype, which is portrayed pretty well in shows like Family Guy. And I don't remember the character, but there is one particular character that sees a lot of exposure with the extremely racist category. So, effeminate Asian males. Historical perception of Asian males as weak was combined with the nerd stereotype from a more modern perspective, based on their learning-oriented culture, creates an effeminate perception of Asian males. People generally viewed Asian males as more fit for a librarian than a security role, in a study conducted by Hall in 2015, cited by Abrams 2019. And this... okay, never mind, moving on. So, legal boundaries. There are relatively few modern legal barriers compared to historical. So let's analyze the historical ones because there's a lot more of them to talk about. A majority of them can be condensed into the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which started with the Burlingame-Seward Treaty in 1868, which was a treaty between America and China to sort of give provisions for Asians that were immigrating over for work and other economic purposes. Unfortunately, the Burlingame Treaty often saw many violations because of the really strong anti-Asian sentiment that was going around at the time. And this was furthered by the Angle Treaty in 1880, which restricted the ability of Asians to immigrate to the United States of America. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 furthered this by restricting, by essentially suspending the immigration of new Asians to America, and forcing those that were already present in America to carry around a certification of their career status, which included peasant, doctor, and laborer, I think. The Scott Act of 1888 was a further restriction on immigration to the United States of America by Asians, and the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended in the year 1892, my bad, not 1900, the 1892, to basically extend it for another 10 years, because the Chinese Exclusion Act ran for 10 years, then the Geary Act for another 10 years, and there was another one after that that didn't have nearly as much effect, but the Geary Act was the last of the major Chinese exclusion acts. But all of these acts were essentially designed to restrict and deter Asians from immigrating to the United States of America to take up jobs and other opportunities. So, proposed solutions. Culturally competent care. The whole idea behind this is that Asians as a culture and as a race are very opposed to the idea that somebody can be mentally unwell, I would suppose. They believe that there is a very, very definite line between being healthy and competent and being basically lazy and ensnared in vice. So if you're not, being as productive as you possibly can, you're falling into the other category. There is no in-between, and as such, you are just dumb, lazy. So as such, many Asians choose not to seek out mental treatment, which makes their symptoms worse and often results in a very violent end, as is the case with many types of mental illness. Sorry. Okay. So, Abrams 2019 analyzed a study done by NIH where a cognitive behavior therapy was adapted for Asian Americans to deal with the cultural barrier and other communication issues between different generations in order to address the stigma behind, mental illness. And this study found that there was actually the effect of the treatment was actually magnified by a factor of 2, and the amount of people that returned for further treatment was greatly increased. I think by 40%. So this is one of the many methods that has been suggested to aid Asian communities, but this is more for mental wellness, so that they can stay in the workforce rather than actually being directly tied to the workforce, which would probably involve more around dealing with communication issues generally, mostly language barriers. So, international impacts on the subject demographic. Of course, if there's a problem here, are people across the world seeing this problem? So, the first example I chose to look at was Asia. Pretty odd because I'm talking about Asian Americans, which would be kind of dumb except for one odd thing. Asia has no shortage of Asians, obviously, but one thing they do have but they are a very competitive group. They don't have a shortage of jobs. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm very tired, I'm sorry. But there is a very, very big problem with competition, because Asians in general are very, very competitive in terms of, achievement in general. So, one thing that's been seen in more recent years is that Asians are starting to very heavily favor candidates that are towards the younger side, which means that candidates roughly 45 or above are starting to see a very, very, very large decline in the amount of jobs that they can find. And this was corroborated to me by my uncle, who is roughly 55 to 56, and has been unable to find a job for the last 4 to 5 years. Yes, I understand this is not a professional citation, but it is the best example of this that I could find, because there wasn't really any concrete evidence that I could find in other sources. So I had to go directly to my uncle and ask him, and he told me that it's been increasingly hard for him to find a job as an older citizen of an Asian country. So the other country I chose to study was Romania. So Romania has recently massively increased the amount of work licenses that they've been giving to foreigners. I think they doubled it from 50,000 to 100,000 in 2022. And a large portion of the people that have taken up these work licenses belong to South and East Asian countries. Unfortunately, Romania has done very little to assist their workers due to obviously language barriers, but there is also the problem of extremely low pay, which was also a problem in the historic United States of America. And while we have fixed it over the course of the last 100 or so years, Romania has unfortunately not solved this issue, and there are investigations underway surrounding workplace abuses of Vietnamese and Indian workers, among other Asian countries. There are also many signs of modern slavery present in Romanian companies, including high debt rates, passport confiscations, and forced labor in order to deal with the labor shortage that Romania has been having, which is not very good news for the Asians living there. So all in all, Jesus, that was a very, very out of place presentation. These are my references, and I'm so sorry for this substandard presentation. Have a nice day, everyone.